Hi, I'm Rowena. My brother once laughed in my face, threw my business cards on the ground, and crushed them under his designer shoes, right in front of our parents. They didn't say a word. At that dinner, I had no name tag, no seat, no voice. Just silence. But here's the twist. 1 week later, his boss introduced me to the entire company as their new owner. Why did I stay quiet for so long? And what kind of family claps for your humiliation, but falls silent when you rise? You think you know betrayal, but what if it's dressed in smiles and family photos? Let me tell you what happened next. It was supposed to be a celebration. At least that's what the embossed invitations implied. Gold foil, scripted lettering, RSVPs sent weeks in advance. My parents' house in Bellevue gleamed under strings of white lights, the smell of rosemary pork wafting through the entryway as waitstaff floated around in black aprons. Every inch of the night screamed prestige, but the moment I walked through the front door, I became invisible. Gideon's voice echoed from the living room before I even stepped out of my coat. Next quarter, we're implementing my system-wide pivot strategy. Meridian doesn't know what's coming. This is leadership, he declared, holding a glass of wine like it was a microphone. He was already in full performance mode. His new role as executive vice president at Meridian Technologies had gone to his head before his ID badge was even printed. Our father laughed the loudest at every punchline. Our mother beamed like she was watching her son walk across a graduation stage all over again. I hung my coat quietly and slipped into the room, wearing my black Armani blazer, the one I'd bought secondhand, but tailored just right. No one noticed. No one paused. Then Gideon spotted me. "Well, well," he said, his grin sharp. "Still playing consultant, huh?" Before I could answer, he reached into the coat I had just hung up. "What's this?" He pulled out the stack of business cards I'd brought for networking, tastefully minimal, embossed with my name and title. Rowena Knox, Strategic Innovation Consultant. He held them up like they were dirty laundry. "Consultant? More like unemployed dreamer." Laughter rippled through the room. He dropped the cards to the floor. Before I could react, he ground the toe of his $900 loafer into one, dragging it across the hardwood like he was erasing me from the surface. The card bent, crumpled, and smeared under his weight. I didn't flinch. I didn't bend down. I simply looked up and scanned the room. My mother chuckled softly, eyes flicking to me with a kind of maternal pity that burned more than anger. My father said nothing. His silence wrapped around me like an accusation. "You don't scream when they erase you," I thought. "You take notes." Dinner followed. Formal, elegant, with place cards written in gold ink. Gideon's card read, "Mr. Gideon Rayner, EVP." My father's said, "Dr. Clive Rayner, board member." Even the neighbors had titles. There was no card for me. I stood awkwardly until a server noticed and offered a chair from the kitchen. No nameplate, no reservation. I dragged it next to the smallest corner of the table, the only place left. My mother glanced over and said, too brightly, "Oh, honey, we weren't sure if you'd make it. We didn't want to assume." As I slid the chair in, the legs screeched against the floor. My fork clinked louder than it should have against the plate when I reached for salad. No one acknowledged either sound. I stared down at my untouched meal. The meat looked perfectly cooked. The wine sparkled like something from a magazine, and yet I couldn't taste a thing. You see, I told myself, erasure doesn't scream. It smiles while pulling out the extra chair. They didn't mean to hurt me. That was the worst part. This wasn't cruelty, it was omission. Casual, generational. My achievements didn't fit their narrative, so they wrote me out of the script without thinking twice. And I had let them, for years. As dessert was served, I pulled my phone under the table, shielding the screen from the candlelight. One message blinked from Kate, my assistant. Subject: confirmation. Body: Aurora's acquisition of Meridian. Finalized. Documents signed, board notified. You're officially majority owner. Monday morning, it goes public. I stared at the message. Everyone around me lifted their glasses to toast Gideon. To a future leader, someone said. I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to. The battlefield had already shifted. They just didn't know it yet. By the time I slipped out the front door, no one noticed. The porch light still cast its warm glow across the hedges, laughter echoing behind me as though it belonged to a show I wasn't cast in. My heels clicked against the stone walkway, the only sound acknowledging I was leaving. The air had turned colder than it was when I arrived. Fitting. I walked 2 blocks to my car, parked there because the driveway had been full, or maybe just because no one had thought to reserve a space for me. As I slid into the driver's seat of my Audi, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm, composed, hollow. If you leave a party and no one realizes you're gone, were you ever really there? I stayed parked for a moment, headlights off, hands resting on the steering wheel. My fingers curled slightly, not in anger, but in restraint. Not even the soft leather under my palms could smooth out the friction inside me. Rewind 2 hours. I had just stepped into the dining area to find a glass of wine before the toast. One of the guests, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, glanced at me as he waved his empty glass. "Hey, could you refill the wine in the den?" he said. I stared at him for a beat too long. His eyes didn't flinch. He thought I worked there. I didn't correct him. Instead, I walked over to the bar cart, picked up a fresh bottle, and handed it to him with a polite smile. He nodded, not with gratitude, but with expectation, and turned away before saying thank you. The room blurred for a second, not from emotion, but clarity. I'd worn neutrals, as usual: taupe blouse, gray slacks, flats, easy to blend in, safe, professional, and now, invisible. I used to think dressing down made me approachable. Lately, it just made me feel like drywall. And the part that stung more? I had once hosted a panel at this very venue, paid for the whole event through Aurora. The staff then knew my name. Now I was furniture. Later in the evening, while I waited for the coat check, Gideon's assistant, fresh-faced, probably 2 years out of college, wandered over, flipping through the check tags in her hand. "Oh, hey," she said brightly, as if we were old friends. "You're Gideon's sister, right? Or cousin?" She laughed awkwardly. "He told me you were like a creative freelancer or something. I thought maybe you were the MC tonight, or like one of the event people." I tilted my head. "Something like that." She didn't pick up on the tone. "He said you're the artsy one who makes cool stuff, but never really, monetized it." Her voice dropped like she was sharing a compliment, not a jab. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it wasn't new. That's how he saw me, how he sold me, a footnote. He was painting himself as the professional, the innovator. I was just the quirky background sister, like someone who made mood boards but never built anything real. I let her finish collecting coats. On the way to the car, I replayed the exchange again and again. Not just what she said, but what no one had said. No one had stepped in to say, "Actually, she's our investor," or "She owns the company now," or even just, "That's Rowena Knox." The truth wasn't hidden, it was just inconvenient. They didn't know what I had built, and that wasn't their fault. It was mine. I'd spent years crafting a business that didn't need a name on a marquee to be powerful. Aurora Ventures was designed to be quiet, on purpose. We invested, we acquired, we stayed anonymous, and I'd let that strategy bleed into my personal life. Tonight, that choice hurt more than I expected. I glanced at my phone. Kate had followed up with a time-stamped confirmation. Meridian acquisition completed at 6:47 p.m. You're officially majority stakeholder. That room? Still clapping for a man who had no idea who signed his paycheck. Tomorrow, they'd learn. Not because I'd tell them, but because the system would. But for now, I sat in my car, listening to the quiet hum of the city, the echo of laughter still bleeding from the house behind me. The worst part wasn't being misidentified. It was realizing no one corrected them. By the time I got home, it was well past midnight. The lights of the city cast long, silent streaks across the hardwood floors of my penthouse, reflections dancing from glass to ceiling. I didn't bother turning on the TV or music. The silence tonight didn't need competition. I poured myself a glass of red from the bottle I'd opened a few nights ago. Forgotten, but still drinkable. It wasn't about the taste. It was about holding something warm in my hand while the memories started rolling like end credits I didn't ask for. My heels were still on. My makeup smudged just enough to remind me of how long I'd held my composure. I sat on the velvet armrest, not quite ready to sink into the couch. The skyline sparkled outside my window, a panorama of success I supposedly hadn't earned. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just well-dressed grief. The video replayed in my mind before I could stop it. Gideon standing at the head of the table, remote in hand, smiling like a campaign ad. "I wanted to share something special tonight," he'd said, as if this were a family reunion instead of another shrine to his ego. A soft montage played on the TV. Legacy of the Rainers, the title card read. It opened with grainy clips from childhood. Our backyard in autumn, Christmas mornings, piano recitals. Laughter, holidays, birthdays, milestones. My face didn't appear once. Not in the pool scenes. Not in the treehouse building project. Not even in the graduation photos. I had been in all of those. I'd filmed some of them. I remembered holding the camcorder on Thanksgiving, while everyone else took turns pretending they were directors. But in Gideon's version, I was a footnote. No, not even that. I was missing. The guests clapped when the video ended. Our mother dabbed at her eyes, whispering, "So proud of you, honey." Our father smiled in that tight-lipped way that meant he approved. I sipped my drink then, lips pressed together, nodding politely. No one looked at me. No one noticed. I wasn't absent. I was edited. Later, during dessert, someone mentioned the video. I stayed quiet, stirring my coffee until the cream swirled into nothing. Then, my mother leaned over and, in that saccharine tone only mothers can deliver while gutting you with a sentence, said, "If Rowena had stuck to something, maybe she'd have something to celebrate too." No bitterness, no sarcasm, just a passing observation, like commenting on the weather. Gideon chuckled. My father poured more wine. I didn't say a word. You don't bleed when the wound is slow. You just stop expecting to heal. Now, back in my apartment, I moved from the armrest to the carpet, pulling a storage box from under the bookshelf. Inside, years of articles, program booklets, pitch decks, laminated badges from conferences I'd spoken at. Proof I'd existed outside the frame of their approval. I pulled out a photo. Me, 28, holding a giant check for a regional startup competition. I'd won first place. No one in my family had been there. I told them afterward. They congratulated me via text. That startup later merged into the core of Aurora Ventures. Today, we sponsor that very pitch competition. They can cut me from the past, but they can't rewrite the future I own. I placed the photo on my desk, leaning it against a small award plaque. It didn't sparkle. It didn't match the decor. But it belonged. If they wanted a legacy without me, I'd give them a future they couldn't deny. Sunday mornings used to feel like something soft. Pancakes, voicemail greetings from Grandma, or curling up with the newspaper while the city was still stretching itself awake. But not this morning. I woke up to stillness, yes, but it wasn't peace. It was something else. A calm that came not from rest, but from restraint finally reaching its limit. The sunlight bled through the curtains just enough to remind me of everything I'd swallowed the night before. It sat heavy in my chest like morning fog. Thick, quiet, and impossible to ignore. I made coffee, the real kind, not a pod. Then I sat cross-legged in front of the storage boxes lining the corner of my apartment. These were boxes I hadn't touched in years, labeled old wins in handwriting I once thought was ambitious. I opened one, thumbing through folders and awards that had never seen a family frame or fridge magnet. That's when I saw it. A manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed but creased with time. On the front, in elegant script I hadn't seen in years. "Don't let them forget. Grandma. I opened it. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 7 years ago. The headline read, Young Innovator Disrupts Tech Investment Norms. Below it, a photo of me, holding a check nearly the size of my body. I looked younger, obviously, but what struck me most was my eyes. I had the kind of smile people only wear when they believe the world is finally opening its doors. Taped to the corner of the article was a faded note in Grandma Edith's handwriting. Let them overlook you now. One day, they'll have to answer to you. That article had never made it to the family bulletin board. No one had emailed it around. It wasn't brought up during holidays or slid across the table at brunch like Gideon's golf tournaments or fundraising efforts. Because my wins didn't fit their narrative. Because I didn't win for them. They only frame the moments that flatter the myth they've built around themselves. But Grandma? She saved mine anyway. Quietly, steadily. Like she knew I'd need the proof. I sat back against the wall, clipping in hand, heart not racing, but burning slow, like coal. Controlled heat. Purposeful. Later that day, as I reviewed the final announcement deck for Aurora's Monday presentation, I scrolled to the last slide. No branding, no logo, just white text on black. Being underestimated is the sharpest blade. Edith M. Lorette. I had never shared that quote before. Grandma whispered it to me once in her kitchen while drying a chipped dish. It wasn't meant to be profound. It was meant to keep me upright. It worked. That was the quote I wanted the room to sit with when I stepped forward as the new owner of Meridian. No thunder, no applause, just truth, delivered with the elegance of inevitability. I closed my laptop. Then I stood, poured the rest of the coffee down the sink, and picked up my phone. Kate, I said when she answered, let's go ahead and schedule the internal board presentation. I'll walk them through the new management structure Monday morning. There was a beat of silence on her end. She knew what that meant. You sure? She asked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. They think they've got time to react. I'd rather give them structure than surprise. But either way, we're moving forward. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. They thought they'd buried my story. But they forgot. Roots grow underground first. Sunday evening always carried a strange energy. It held the residue of the weekend, but whispered the tension of the coming week. That night, as dusk folded over the skyline, I stood barefoot in my bedroom, holding the dress in front of me like a relic. Black, sleek, structured but bold. 5 years ago, I had pulled it off the rack with pride, thinking it made me look powerful. My mother had looked at it once and said, Sweetheart, it's a lovely dress, but it's not really for our kind of crowd, is it? She'd smiled like she was doing me a favor. I wore beige instead, faded into the walls, sat near the back, nodding at conversations I wasn't invited into. That was a different Rowena. Not tonight. I zipped the dress up myself, tugging it over my frame with intention. The fit was perfect, not because I had changed, but because I had stopped asking for approval. I clasped the diamond studs Grandma Edith had given me, her words echoing like old hymns. They'll always try to shrink you to fit their comfort. This time, I wasn't shrinking. An hour later, I sat in the back seat of a black car headed to a networking gala that Gideon had made sure he'd be seen at. The driver knew the route. I didn't bother giving instructions. As we rolled through the soft glow of streetlights, I opened LinkedIn, more out of habit than interest, and saw Gideon's latest post pinned to the top of my feed. There he was, standing in front of Meridian's headquarters, the company I now owned. His caption read, Proud to be part of the next tech revolution. Leadership is earned, not given. He'd tagged 6 executives, 3 venture capitalists, 1 local news outlet, and then, like he couldn't help himself, he added, Special thanks to the creatives in my life who reminded me that bold ideas are only as good as their execution. Inspiration comes from everywhere, even from the unexpected. I didn't need a translator. That was for me. And the likes? Hundreds. Comments from our cousins, old family friends, people who hadn't bothered to send me a holiday card in years. He didn't just ignore my story, I muttered, scrolling. He turned it into a backdrop for his. The car slowed in front of the venue. Crystal lights sparkled above a sleek entrance where guests mingled, drinks in hand, conversations buzzing like bees over champagne. I stepped out without adjusting my dress. No pulling, no tugging, no checking if I looked appropriate. Let them look. Inside, the room was already humming with introductions, handshakes, laughter that sounded just loud enough to impress. No one stopped me at the door. No one handed me a name badge. I didn't need one. People glanced my way, some eyes lingering longer than others. A few whispers passed, probably trying to place me. Isn't that? Wait, I think she. I walked slowly, deliberately, past the registration table, past the bar, past the crowd of executives nodding along to Gideon's exaggerated retelling of some market shift he supposedly led. He hadn't seen me yet. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Monday was coming, and with it, a revelation no post, no suit, no title could deflect. I headed toward the back of the room, the very spot I had once been told to stand in so I wouldn't overshadow the speakers. Not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't standing in the back. I was observing the stage I was about to redesign. I passed a waiter with a tray of wine and took a glass without breaking stride. My reflection caught briefly in a panel of mirrored wall, sharp, poised, real. They'd always tried to tell me how to dress, how to speak, how to move. They called it grooming. I called it dilution. Well, here I was, unwatered, unapologetic, and very much in the room. The dress fit. The room didn't. They had no idea I was the storm walking calmly into the boardroom. Monday mornings tend to hum at a different frequency. Most people move with caffeine and caution. Delicate balance, polite nods, inboxes freshly bloated from the weekend. But I wasn't most people today. I sat at my kitchen counter just after 7, the city still stretching beneath a rising Seattle sun. I wore the same navy business suit I'd signed the Meridian acquisition papers in, a quiet flex no one knew about yet. It wasn't about symbolism, it was about symmetry. As I sipped from a heavy ceramic mug, I opened my laptop and pulled up the file again. His signature was still there, crisp and confident, sitting beneath a phrase I'd memorized long before it was typed. We don't engage with ghost shell ventures pretending to be innovative. Gideon Rayner, external consultant, Meridian Technologies. That email had been circulated internally a year ago when Aurora Ventures, operating under a different holding name, had submitted a silent proposal to acquire Meridian's underperforming infrastructure division. The offer was solid, generous actually, but Gideon, ever eager to perform intelligence, had turned it into a teachable moment during a management meeting, mocking it with performative flair. He didn't know it was my offer then, and I didn't correct him. He once stepped over my name. This time, he signed against it. I shut the laptop, grabbed my keys, and headed for the elevator. Downstairs, the Bentley purred as the driver opened the rear door. He nodded, already aware of our destination. He didn't say anything. I didn't need him to. The drive toward Meridian's downtown tower cut through familiar blocks. I didn't look out the window. I was rehearsing. Not lines, but a shift in posture, a narrowing of the eyes, a pause before a truth bomb. I'd practiced this scene in my head for years, and now it was finally set. But before the tower came into view, another memory slipped in. Uninvited but sharp. 2 nights ago. The gala. It was a room packed with polished shoes and curated egos. The chairs had been arranged in concentric circles around a stage bathed in white light. Gideon took the stage to the sound of expensive applause. His presentation was titled, "The Future We Lead." I knew that title. I had written it. 6 months earlier, during a strategic pitch session for Meridian's rebranding, I had outlined that very deck. The slide order, the metaphors, the phrasing. He had kept almost all of it. Except the name. Mine. No citation, no credit, no nod. He didn't just steal the spotlight. He used my light and told them it was his. I had stood in the back that night, drink in hand, listening to his voice deliver my vision like it was an original score. People clapped, leaned in, asked for copies of the slides afterward. The company's senior VP whispered to me, "You must be proud of your brother." I smiled. "Sure," I said. Back in the Bentley, the memory ended, and I found myself checking my notes once more. This wasn't anger anymore. This was strategy. By the time we pulled up to Meridian HQ, the city was in full swing. Employees buzzed through revolving doors, coffee cups in hand, heads down. I stepped out, straightened my jacket, and walked inside. The receptionist offered a professional smile. She recognized me, not from a LinkedIn post or family photo, but from the board briefing last week. She stood quickly. "Ms. Knox, the boardroom is prepped. Your documents have been placed, and your presentation will load automatically." "Perfect." As I rode the elevator up, I ran through my opening lines again. Not because I doubted them, but because I respected the moment enough to honor it with precision. They think today is just another corporate Monday, but for me, it's a correction. He framed himself as the future. I just kept the receipt that proved otherwise. By 8 a.m., Meridian's lobby was a blur of motion. Coffee cups, elevator dings, the buzz of another Monday beginning like any other. Except it wasn't. I arrived early, before the building was fully awake, and took the private elevator directly to my temporary suite on the executive floor. Security nodded as I passed. Not out of habit, but because they'd been briefed. Their discretion was part of the strategy. Every move today was measured. From behind the tinted glass of my viewing office, I had a perfect view of the floor below, where Gideon had already begun his morning performance. He moved with the swagger of someone who believed he had earned his seat instead of borrowing it, barking instructions to assistants, dismissing updates from department heads, acting like his name was etched in stone above the company's masthead. He had ordered a repainting of his office before the onboarding paperwork was even complete. 2 department leads had been reassigned. 3 longtime managers had been publicly humiliated in front of their teams. My phone vibrated once on the desk beside me. A message from Kate. "He's fired the entire mid-level strategic group from R&D. Said they were legacy deadweight." One of those employees had been with Meridian for 14 years. She had worked directly with Aurora Ventures during merger due diligence. Quietly, respectfully, and under NDA. He called it streamlining. I called it reckless. He's chopping trees in a forest he doesn't know I planted. I stood, adjusted my collar, and moved toward the elevator. On my way out, I passed a wall-mounted screen flashing the agenda for the day. The 10 a.m. slot was labeled All Company Strategic Briefing. Gideon's name was nowhere on it. That was intentional. In the hallway, Gerald Faulkner, Meridian's now former CEO, caught my eye from his glass-walled office and mouthed a single word. "Ready?" I smiled. He texted seconds later anyway. "He's going to lose it when he sees the chart." My reply was simple. Let him. Earlier that morning, every board member and executive leader received a revised organizational chart from Aurora Ventures. My name was listed as CEO. The EVP title Gideon had been flaunting all weekend, replaced with the label Vacated, Q1 Restructure. No memo had gone to him. There was no calendar invite for his removal. The silence was by design. I stepped into the main atrium. A few employees glanced up as I walked through. Not with recognition, but with the careful attention people give someone they sense is important, even if they can't place why. The conference hall was already being set up. Gideon's name was taped to a front row seat. Fitting. Let him sit and watch what a real executive strategy looks like. I walked the perimeter once, absorbing the air of anticipation. Kate was already inside, giving last-minute instructions to AV techs and photographers. She saw me and approached with a quiet smile. "Everything's in place," she said. I nodded. Make sure the photographer captures his face when the first slide hits. Side or full front? Side. I want to see recognition before denial. She chuckled softly, then turned back toward the setup crew. I stood still for a moment longer, watching them arrange chairs and test microphones. In less than 2 hours, the room would be full. The board, department heads, employees from across divisions. Most had no idea what today would become. That was the beauty of it. This wasn't revenge. It was disclosure. He thought Monday would be his coronation. I made sure it became his audit. At 9:58 a.m., I stood behind the stage curtain of Meridian's main auditorium, still and composed. I could hear the soft rumble of pre-meeting chatter, tech managers reviewing notes, junior staff whispering about new leadership rumors, and a handful of board members exchanging casual greetings, unaware that their assumptions were minutes from collapse. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start. From my vantage point, I could see the front row. Gideon sat exactly where we placed his nameplate, legs crossed, a smug tilt to his jaw. He was dressed like a man expecting a crown, not realizing he was already seated on the edge of a cliff. Beside him, our parents had just arrived. My mother wore a tailored ivory jacket, her version of regal neutrality. My father held a program in his lap like it doubled as a press release for his son's elevation. They came to see his future. Instead, they'll watch mine unfold. Gerald Faulkner, still gracious even as a man whose title had been quietly absorbed, stepped onto the stage. He adjusted the mic, smiled toward the audience, and began. Thank you all for joining us today. As you know, Meridian has undergone a significant strategic transition. This morning, I have the honor of introducing you to the visionary who now holds the majority stake in our company, someone who's been a silent architect behind this transformation. There was a pause. I could see Gideon shift slightly, his smile tightening. His hand reached for the mug in front of him. Please welcome Ms. Rowena Knox. The room froze. The mug slipped from Gideon's fingers. It hit the auditorium floor with a sharp ceramic shatter that echoed louder than any applause. Phones were raised. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through dry leaves. I stepped into the light. I didn't blink. I didn't scan for reactions. I walked to the podium like I belonged, because I did. This isn't a performance, I began. It's a business plan. Silence. Not the awkward kind, reverent. Behind me, the presentation screen glowed with the new organizational structure. A few rows back, someone whispered, "She's the owner?" I turned one page in my notes. Not for theatrics, just rhythm. Effective immediately, Meridian Technologies will operate under the oversight of Aurora Ventures. You may not know the name, but you felt the impact. The slide advanced. A staffer backstage had been instructed precisely. At that very moment, a camera feed captured a different scene. Gideon's office door, his EVP nameplate, polished brass and bold, was being unscrewed. Quietly, firmly. A tech zoomed in as it dropped to the floor. Gasps spread. One board member mouthed a curse. Another took off his glasses. I didn't look back. I let the image linger for just long enough. Leadership isn't a title, I said calmly. It's what remains when the title is gone. A beat. Then another slide. I outlined the restructuring, transparent reporting, equity-based innovation hubs, a firm line between performance and pretense. As I spoke, I watched faces shift, from shock to respect, to something harder to name. Accountability, perhaps. Then came the applause. It started quietly, from the back rows, the ones who'd been ignored in every company town hall before. Then louder, rising like a wave, cresting past the board, past the executive row, until it hit the front. My father stood, tried to interrupt. I raised a hand, not high, just enough. Security, I said softly, nodding toward the sides. Two uniformed staff approached with swift courtesy, not aggressive, just procedural. We'll be continuing this briefing with Meridian employees only, I added, scanning the room. The screen now read, Aurora Ventures Vision. This isn't about vengeance, I said, watching as Gideon looked away for the first time since my name had been spoken aloud. This is restructuring, and it starts where it hurts the most, at the roots. The applause didn't drown him. It just reminded him who they were clapping for. Tuesday morning arrived with less noise than the one before. But none of the tension had disappeared. It had just sunk deeper, into the wood grain of the conference tables, the quiet pacing of legal assistants, the subtle shift in how people looked at me. Aurora Ventures' boardroom felt different now. The men who once hesitated to meet my gaze greeted me with subtle nods. The women who once double-checked my title offered firm handshakes. Respect didn't thunder in. It settled, like something overdue. I walked into the room with my tablet tucked under one arm, a paper folder in the other. No fanfare, no title announced. But they knew. Not because I told them, but because the ground beneath them had shifted. It wasn't the applause from yesterday that stayed with me. It was the look on Gideon's face when he realized it was over. He hadn't shown up since. I hadn't expected him to. The meeting began. Updates, rollouts, new internal structures. Everything moving forward without him. Afterward, the head of legal lingered behind. She set a small stack of documents on the table in front of me and tapped the top page. Filed this morning. I flipped through the first few sheets. Everything was as we planned. A lawsuit on behalf of 3 terminated employees. The claim outlined wrongful dismissal, procedural violations, breach of contract, all within the final 6 hours of Gideon's short-lived reign. My name sat at the bottom of the signature page. Not as a plaintiff, not as an accuser, but as the initiator. Quietly, legally, strategically. HR had documented every violation. I'd waited. Not out of fear, but timing. Sometimes you don't need to destroy a man. You just hand him the hammer and wait. Later that morning, I stepped out for air. Walking through the glass hallway that connected our office to the annex building, I spotted someone I hadn't seen since Friday. Sasha Lin. Mid-level strategic analyst. 14 years with Meridian. She'd been one of the 3 fired, humiliated actually, by Gideon's careless attempt to assert control. She froze when she saw me. Then something broke in her face. Tears spilled fast. She didn't try to stop them. I didn't think I'd be allowed back in the building, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought we were all just names on a list. But you remembered we were people. I stepped closer. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then, gently, your badge still works because I told them it should. She nodded, both hands clutching her tote bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Later, I stopped by HR and left a simple instruction. Reinstate her. No explanation needed. Just fix it. That afternoon, I passed the break room while the office buzzed with lunch chatter. Laughter spilled into the hallway. I paused by the doorway, watching a group of junior developers tease each other about trivia scores. They didn't look over. They didn't hush. Good. There was a time not long ago when I'd have stood in that same doorway and gone unnoticed for a different reason. Now, my silence meant something else entirely. You can't always get justice, but you can offer it. Back in my office, I pulled up the final version of the company-wide internal memo. Subject: Culture and Structure, Aurora's Next Chapter. Body: As we move forward, Aurora will prioritize transparency, performance, and human dignity. Restructuring isn't just about roles, it's about values. Let our silence never cost anyone more than it should. I hit send. They thought silence meant weakness. I used it to sharpen every blade I needed. Tuesday afternoon, the air inside Meridian HQ had shifted. Not outwardly, no one said anything out loud. But you could feel it in the way voices lowered near closed doors, in the quick sideways glances exchanged as people passed Gideon's now empty office. A vacuum where volume used to be. The nameplate was gone. The paint he'd insisted be redone only days earlier, still smelled faintly new. But the throne had no occupant. When power evaporates, silence follows like a shadow. I didn't linger. I moved through the corridor with quiet intent, nodding at familiar faces, watching how some smiled, some avoided my gaze, some simply didn't know what to do with me yet. Down the hallway, near the East Wing, a partner firm's representative caught up with me. He was a well-dressed man in his 50s, someone I'd met briefly once, but who clearly didn't remember. "Ms. Knox," he greeted warmly. "Your leadership message yesterday was fearless. So glad Meridian's finally in such capable hands." I nodded with a polite smile. Then he blinked. "Wait, are you not Gideon's new executive assistant?" His smile froze. I held his gaze, unbothered. "No need to apologize," I said evenly. "I've been misidentified before." I gestured toward the glass wall framing the entire floor, where the Aurora Ventures logo was being newly installed by facilities. "I just own the place now." I left him standing mid-sentence, unsure whether to laugh, apologize again, or pretend it hadn't happened. I didn't care which. Later, as I looped back toward the conference wing, I passed a crew of custodial staff removing decor from the weekend event. Most of the personal touches Gideon had added, photos of him with my parents, framed quotes, golf trophies, were being packed into boxes. Only one picture remained on the wall. It was small, slightly off-center. It was me and Grandma Edith, years ago, at my first pitch competition. I was holding a certificate, wearing a crooked blazer, and she was beaming like I'd just won a Pulitzer. No one had told them to leave it. It had simply remained. I reached out and touched the frame, just with the tips of my fingers. Some legacy isn't curated. It's remembered. No spotlight, no speech. Just presence that refused to be erased. I ended my day in the boardroom, reviewing ethics policy drafts and approving operational updates. Alone. No camera crews, no champagne flutes. There was a satisfaction in that. Undramatic, but solid. They said I didn't belong. So I built a place where people would. Some people chase recognition. Others just replace the rooms that once shut them out. Thursday night settled in like a quiet verdict. I sat at my dining table, the soft light of the pendant above flickering slightly, more atmospheric than practical. My laptop was open, cursor blinking on a blank email draft. Actually, 3 of them. One to my parents, one to Gideon, one to myself. I stared at the screen for a while. Not because I didn't know what to write. I knew exactly what I could say. Had rehearsed versions of it in my head too many times to count. Words that clarified, condemned, forgave. Versions where I was gracious. Versions where I was brutal. But I didn't send any of them. Closure isn't what they give you. It's what you decide to stop waiting for. I closed the lid. The silence in the room felt earned. Earlier that day, I'd gone down to the basement level at Aurora HQ to look through archived marketing materials. We were planning to redesign the employee welcome kits, and I wanted to see what had been done before we built something new. Most of it was dusty mugs, outdated branding on notebooks, old mouse pads no one had used in years. Then I found it. A cardboard box labeled Internal Swag, 2015. Inside, buried under old lanyards, was a coffee mug. White, simple, faded type on the side. The quiet one. I exhaled through my nose, not quite a laugh. That nickname had followed me around the company in its early days like static cling. Someone had coined it because I didn't interrupt meetings, didn't overshare in brainstorms, didn't fight for attention. At first, it felt harmless. A private joke. But then it stuck. When people introduced me, they used it like an adjective. "This is Rowena, she's the quiet one." Not CEO, not founder, just quiet. It was meant kindly. But kindness, when condescending, becomes erasure in slow motion. Now I held it like a relic of a version of me I no longer owed anyone. I brought the mug upstairs and placed it on the shelf beside my new business card holder. A black metal frame, engraved with my full title. Let them remember the version of me they underestimated. I keep her here to remind me how far I've come. Around 6:30 p.m., I got a text from my mother. When you're ready to talk, we're here. No apology, no context. Just the same vague invitation they always extended when things had already gone too far. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote, "You don't owe anyone the kind of forgiveness that still asks you to be small." Later, a voicemail popped up from Gideon. I listened to it once. It was full of false starts. "Hey, um, I just, I know things got, I guess we both," long pauses. A few sentences that almost sounded like accountability, but never quite got there. He never said sorry. I didn't need him to anymore. Some wounds don't scar. They just stop aching when you stop poking them. Around 9 I met with Elaine, a mentor from my early startup days. We grabbed tea at a quiet corner cafe. She looked the same, sharp eyes, half smile, voice like a scalpel. "You've done what most people only imagine," she said, after I told her the whole story. I shrugged. "Not sure I ever wanted it to look like this." She stirred her tea. "Some wars are won not by declarations, but by exits." We talked a bit more about legacy, about learning when to stop explaining yourself, about the cost of silence, and the even higher cost of chasing permission. On the walk home, I moved slowly, letting the Seattle nights surround me. The sky was clear, a rarity I didn't take for granted. They wanted me to come back home to say I forgive them, but this new address is already enough proof. I moved on. I didn't need their redemption arc. I was already writing the epilogue on my own terms. Thursday morning brought a kind of light I hadn't felt in a long time. Clean, crisp, and undesperate. The city skyline stretched out beyond the tinted windows of my corner office at Meridian. It no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like mine. I walked in without hesitation. My assistant had already set today's brief on the conference table. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. Not fear, not tension, just rearranged air. The first thing I saw as I stepped behind my desk was the frame. Thick glass, solid walnut base. Inside, a business card. Not just any card, that card. The same one Gideon had stomped into the hardwood weeks earlier, grinding his heel across my title, like he was erasing me from existence. The embossing had faded. There was a smear of wax, a torn corner. But it was intact, visible, real. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Every time they said I couldn't." People saw it every time they entered my office. Some glanced, some lingered. New hires were told the story during onboarding, not as a warning, but as a reminder. The past doesn't define you, but it sure as hell can fuel you. That card wasn't a memory. It was a receipt. I sat down, letting the chair hug my shoulders the way it never did when it belonged to someone else. My calendar had a light block of meetings, nothing heavy. I liked it that way. Space to think, lead, not just react. Mid-morning, Kate buzzed in. "HR forwarded something," she said, voice carefully neutral. "From Gideon. He's applied for a C-suite role at Synaxis Group. They've requested a character reference." I looked up from my laptop. "Draft a response," I said. "Single sentence." She nodded. "What would you like it to say?" I didn't hesitate. Gideon Rayner's legacy should be remembered for what it tried to erase. That's all. Kate didn't ask for clarification. She knew that wasn't spite. It was fact. I returned to my workflow, reviewing financial forecasts and community outreach updates. Somewhere in another city, I imagined Gideon reading that sentence. Maybe he'd bristle. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe, finally, he'd understand. But understanding was no longer my responsibility. That afternoon, I met with our newest management cohort in the second-floor auditorium. They were fresh-faced, sharp, hungry, not just for titles, but for impact. The topic I gave them: rebuilding from the margins. I shared parts of my journey, just enough to ground the room, not center myself. I talked about what it meant to be underestimated, what it cost, and how silence can be the strongest stage if you build it right. And I ended with the quote I kept folded in my wallet, since Grandma Edith wrote it on a napkin in a diner we used to visit. You don't have to set the room on fire. Just redesign the building. Applause was brief, but heartfelt. I didn't stay for handshakes. I excused myself politely, walked back upstairs. Before entering the boardroom for our final review of the quarter, I paused by the frame on my desk, ran my finger along the glass. They'd tried to throw me out with that card. Now it sat beneath glass, lit by the corner sunlight, proof that what they discarded became the foundation of everything I built. There isn't one. The silence I once endured now speaks louder than applause. Some battles are won in silence, not because we lacked the courage to speak, but because we chose the power of timing. I've learned that you don't need to yell to be heard. Sometimes all you need is to endure long enough for the truth to echo without force. If there's one thing I'd leave you with, it's this. Being underestimated can be your greatest weapon, if you're willing to let your work speak while others talk. They may strip your name off the door, laugh at your cards, rewrite your story. Let them. Then build a table they can't sit at. This isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation, about turning dismissals into data points and insults into architecture. Have you ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build? If so, what did you do? Or what will you do next time? Let's talk about it in the comments. I want to hear your story too. And if this video made you pause, made you feel seen, or even just gave you something to think about, drop a 1 in the comments. Or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, tell me why. Let's have a real conversation. If you want more stories that go deeper than drama and speak to what really shapes us, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your story matters too. Let's keep sharing them together.